It's 1 o'clock. We're going to start today. We have our webinar, Shared Platforms, Important Insights for Nonprofits from hosts and users. So I like to start wherever I am in any meeting, whether there's like 2 or 3 people to 2,000, to just take a couple of deep breaths for us to get grounded and present just in this moment, because we all have nerves. I get very nervous myself. So wherever you're at, I invite you to get grounded, and we're gonna actually get your shoulders up. Put your shoulders up tense, because I know I'm feeling a little tense. And we're gonna take a deep breath in. But when you breathe out, you're just gonna put your shoulders down. So out. Another one in. Hold it for a moment. And out. And we're gonna do one more. Final one in. And I invite you to sigh out just for some relief. It's been a long few years. I know we've all experienced that. My name is Jermaine Henry, and I'm a consultant, MC, facilitator, and I'm one to create braver spaces for meaningful change in the philanthropic sector. I'm so happy to be here today to be hosting with y'all. I'm in Toronto, all right? So I am coming from the Dish with One Spoon Treaty Territory, who's been the homelands of many Anishinaabe people, the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. I invite y'all in the chat, for y'all that are in the chat, for you to share your name, where you're coming from, even your pronouns. I'm he, him. And we're going to be able to ask questions in the chat. And as well as if you have any technical difficulties like that, then make sure that you put it in there. We got our ONN supports there. So this is a webinar presented by the Ontario Nonprofit Network. Awesome. Thank y'all for being in the chat. This is awesome. So we are going to start today in this conversation grounding with shared platforms, and how we're going to get these insights from hosts and users with shared platforms. First, we're actually going to get grounded in some of the definitions, as well as we have a guidebook that was presented that ONN has, that we'll be sharing resources after this is coming out, as well as there will be a recording of this session for folks, for all the people that are here and for people that sign up. Now, we are able to get from the source of this guidebook. We have Jillian Witt. So Jillian Witt has worked with a range of organizations and foundations across Canada to build community and shift philanthropy, rooted in local organizing and neighborhood-led change. Jillian's passion for community-led solutions helped to shape a national shared platforms at Makeway, which formerly was Tides Canada. Jillian co-wrote the Shared Platforms Guidebook for Ontario Nonprofit Networks in 2016. In her role as the strategic implementation lead at Openly, Jillian engaged with grassroots groups, shared platforms, and funders to write the ONN Shared Platforms Toolkit that is launching today. So what's amazing is that we actually have some connection, some non-for-profit kin connection. Jillian was also a part of the youth social infrastructure at the beginning days, and was on with the Laidlaw Committee in 2009. I myself, a lot of my work that I will kind of be speaking to today as I'm moderating and speaking on the panel comes from work with the youth social infrastructure, YSI collaborative, and as well as I've done some work with School for Social Entrepreneurs, who is on the Tides Canada platform. So it's just very interesting, the interconnections, but as well as with YSI, Openly, we actually work with Openly with doing evaluations. So I really know and trust that they do some work that is grounded in grassroots organizing. So love to see the connections. And I want to give a warm welcome to Jillian Witt, who will be sharing our Shared Platforms Guidebook. Jillian. Yeah, Toolkit guiding today. It's exciting.
Hi, Jermaine. For some reason, I can't start my video.
Oh.
It's saying unable to start.
Okay.
Oh, the host has stopped it.
Okay, let's see what we can do. Oh, we're back.
Phew. Hi,
you gotta
everyone.
ask this.
Hi, Jermaine. Great. Thanks so much for that introduction. And it's so nice to see so many familiar names coming up in the attendee list. I'm coming to you today from Tiohtià:ke, which is the also known as Montreal. And I'm really grateful to be here with all of you today and share a bit about the shared platform toolkit. And I realized as Jermaine was making the introduction that there is a shared platform guidebook that was created in 2017 that shares lots of the nitty gritty of running a shared platform. And then now we've got a toolkit, and these are shorter one-page tools that we hope groups that are on a shared platform can use, and shared platform organizations can also use. So you'll be learning a bit more about that today. And I just wanted to share a bit about my own experience, because I realized that I've now been on the board of a foundation that supported shared platforms. I've been a worker on a shared platform, which is now Make Way. And then now in my own community work in my neighborhood, I am part of a group that rests on a shared platform. So I've had the pleasure of being involved in this work from many different angles. So today I'm going to share a bit about what a shared platform is, why you might want to use one, the pros and cons, and then how the toolkit can support better practices in the sector. Just going to share my slides. So I thought I'd just start us off with a bit of context to make sure we're all coming from this with a bit of the same information. So most grants and donations require that a group is incorporated as a nonprofit. And for some, they require charitable status, especially private family foundations and other types of charitable foundations require this. We also know that a lot of nonprofits and charities struggle to manage their operations. There are 170,000 nonprofits in Canada, and 54% of those are volunteer run, and 86,000 charities. 2,000 new charities come in every year, and we're also losing 2,000 charities every year, often because of filing requirements to maintain that status. So there's a lot of work that goes into maintaining those entities. We also know that Indigenous-led and Black-led organizations are disproportionately underfunded or unfunded. And that means that there's less resources going to Indigenous and Black-led groups that are more likely to be volunteer-run or not have access to the same resources to set up the infrastructure of an organization. And I just wanted to highlight the unfunded report that came out, I believe it was last year, and show some research about how true this is about the unfunding of Black-led organizations. So I'm sharing this because, we need to reform and rejuvenate and renew the sector in many ways. And the shared platforms are just part of that solution. And what shared platforms do is they provide, it's where an organization provides a home for a project that is otherwise unincorporated or doesn't have its own legal status of any kind. And often we'll hear words like trusteeship, organizational mentor or mentee, incubator, intermediary can be used. There's lots of different words that are used. But today we're going to use the term shared platform and to mean providing that type of a home. I'm so curious what terms you hear. If I'm missing any terms in this definition, feel free to share in the chat. What words do you most often hear around the term shared platform? And I also wanted to give some examples. So when I was working on the ONN project, I got to speak with shared platform groups groups that are resting on ones and groups that are acting as shared platforms. And one of the groups I got to speak with was Tashaila Bailey who founded Sis to Sis Toronto, which provides, it's a youth-led grassroots group that creates vibe-filled spaces that allow young women to show up authentically while becoming their best selves. And when I talked to Tashaila, she said that she joined a shared platform when she started Sis to Sis, originally just to access grants, but what she gained was mentorship and support that helped their work to thrive. I also, and I saw that Natalie's on this call from the Trustee Hub. I just wanted to give an example of a shared platform that exists. And so the Toronto Neighborhood Group's Trustee Hub is an example of a shared platform. And what they're doing is extending the mission of their organization to support community-led groups. And that includes that legal home, so the finances, the governance, the support to these unincorporated groups, but it also includes mentorship and support, coaching, and capacity building in other ways. Some of the benefits of a shared platform, it allows groups to share the capacity that they've already built in their organizations. They can support new leaders who maybe haven't set up their own organization, but have an amazing idea or incredible community work that they're doing, and just needed space to make that happen. It's also a way to test new ideas or foster social innovation is another way that can be called, but provide that space to learn and try and test new things. And it can also improve funding access and outcomes. And that's why I shared Joyanne Smith's quote here about the work of C, supporting and providing that platform for C is really important because it's a way to make sure that and grow the number of Black-led, Black-serving groups in Toronto. There are also many shared platform challenges that we heard through this project, including many of the power dynamics that take place as groups are trying to find a shared platform. Who gets accepted onto a platform? Who is holding the funds, and how transparent is that process around accessing those funds? Because a group that's on a shared platform is when they receive that grant, it's being held by the shared platform organization. So it's really important that there's really clear processes for how to access and spend that money. I also got to hear about funder policies that influence how groups are structuring themselves, who they can partner with, how they can access money. And also just some challenging practices around a lack of common understanding, clear expectations and standards for using this kind of shared platform model. And so that's where the toolkit has come in. And so talking to groups about where they felt there were some really simple resources needed to support their work. I'll just talk through them, but they're on the ONN resource page, which I'm hoping the ONN folks can add a link. The first one is just simply what is a shared platform, explaining what it is, what it isn't, and what it does and why. There's also a tool for like figuring out if a shared platform is right for you and right for your organization. So if there's for groups trying to figure out if they want to join a shared platform, will that work for their vision for the project that they're leading? But also for organizations who are considering being a shared platform, is it right for their organization and what they do? There's also a tool for selecting a shared platform or selecting a project to join your shared platform. So some criteria to kind of think through. Obviously, in all these cases, it really depends on the group and the organization, but there's some questions to really prompt you to think through what works for you and what's important to you as you look at this as an option. Another piece on good practices for shared platforms, which is going to link you right to the original shared platform guidebook, which is the bigger beast, but provides lots of details on how to implement a shared platform. Information for boards of directors, and also some key ingredients, the shared platform agreement that you would have between a shared platform and a group, what's important to include in that document, so that everyone has clear expectations and is on the same page. There's also communication tips and that includes a conversation guide, and also a resource around ending the shared platform relationship. All right. So this is the start, and I know ONN is really open to gathering feedback, hearing what's missing, if there's new tools that need to be created to improve the practice. So please read and share and contribute to the sector, because we'll be our best when we're all working together and sharing what we know. Thank you.
Thank you. That is awesome. Great presentation. And it's exciting to have just more resources, more language around this. And I'm curious, now that we do have this space, you're sharing it, is if folks that are here that are listening, if they have questions and they have comments that we can share with Jillian. Yeah, so some direct feedback. And this is coming out today. How did you come across making it? Like, how long have you been working on it? Who have you been kind of talking to distill that information?
Well, it's been a long time coming, because I believe the project that started this was started by Carol Arundel back before the pandemic. And so there was some research done early on about, what the sector needed. This is supported by the City of Toronto, by the way. And so this was there was some early research done in, I think, 2019. The project took a pause, and then I picked it up just in the past year, or in 2021. And so some of those conversations had happened long before I joined this project.
You just had access to the information, just kind of synthesizing it, bringing it together.
Absolutely. But we did consult with a lot of folks, again, because so much changed also with the pandemic. And we were seeing, there were groups we're seeing, like new, like mutual aid groups and wanting to access funds, for example. Lots of groups responding on the ground to new needs or growing needs during the past few years.
Yeah, and I can only imagine, like, when we're in such emergence, right? And we're just newly forming these groups, we're newly forming and doing these initiatives. Also, foundations are, being a little more like, hey, how can we get money to you? How can we do this? But it's good to have a toolkit that's like, okay, is there a structure? Is there some language? Is there a framework that we can kind of reference in order to be in these type of relationships where the grassroots is being supported with these charities? Absolutely.
And I think a common theme we heard was like this rush, like there's a grant, I want to access it, and there's this rush into a relationship or a rush into incorporating. And so having some tools of what are the things I need to be thinking through, what do I need to be asking myself, or do we need to be asking ourselves before when we are considering all of these options. It's just important to have some of that in one place. And so that was part of the purpose of the toolkit.
Thank you so much. Well, you're setting us up for this place, because we're going to have this panel conversation. Oh, do I see a question before? We'll have one question before we go to the panel conversation. Do you think the pandemic fueled platform participation to make connections?
Oh, I think it depends on maybe the group, but I think it's fueled like grassroots organizing for sure. And so this is one way that form can take, right? But it can take lots of different forms. We're also seeing more and more funders figuring out ways to directly fund groups that don't have charitable status. So in some cases, it's creating a multitude of pathways, I think.
We need that, right? In order for change to happen, we need it from all levels all the time. Shout out to the outside. I want to, if any questions, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Jillian, for sharing your presentation. Well, you're going to be staying with us. I'm just going to introduce our next panelist, and we're going to get deeper into that conversation about, especially because you're bringing up is like, what is a good fit? You know, how are we entering this relationship with charitable organizations and grassroots organizations? What are the practices? What are the tools? And hopefully we can hear some stories, all right, of how it's happened in action. So first, I want to bring up my good friend and colleague who we've done work maybe the last 7 or 8 years together. And again, another YSIer, Youth Social Infrastructure alumni, and also one of our partners with Young Leaders Circle. Ugh, the preamble. So we got Krista Bazayo, who is French settler and Anishinaabe Kwe from Boating, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. With roots in Mississauga First Nation, currently she is co-chair of the Algoma Community Foundation and program manager with the Ontario Trillium Foundation. As a facilitator and dreamer, Krista has spent the last several years in various avenues of community development with a strong focus on supporting young people doing positive change work in their own community, in her own community. Geez, big ups. Across Ontario and in some contexts across Turtle Island. Given her breadth of work, Krista is well aware of the importance of shared platforms as a step towards reciprocal community development building between those working in the grassroots and those working in institutions. Big ups to Krista and the red lipstick. Also, we got our next panelist, my good friend and also colleague. I'm not going to do a huge preamble again, but Maya Devar is a queer, mixed South Asian and white settler who grew up in Treaty 2 territory in Manitoba, residing in Takaranto, governed by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. She's a project manager, network builder, and coach, currently supporting a team of emerging arts organization leaders to build their own organization and vision through Sketchworking Arts shared platform. She's committed to relationships, justice work, and doing the on-the-ground work of partnership and capacity building, as well as implementing strategy and systems change within and across organizations. Woo! This is fun. This is great. I'm seeing the chat is blowing up. Y'all are not-for-profit superstars out here. This is really cool that to have y'all here. And actually, I think it's really cool for us to have this conversation that we're going to have about 25 minutes in this, maybe a little less. So hopefully we can just, really be as potent as we can and share stories. We have a bit of background with each other, but something that stood out from the shared platforms guide that I was reading, and also when you're talking, Jillian, about the things that need to be known when you're getting into the shared platforms, right? Like, what are the key elements to shared platforms, for instance? So I brought up, it's like clear intentions, balance, capacity, relationships, right? These are like these elements that we speak to. And I wonder, and I'm curious of your perspectives of like, how has this shown up for y'all in your experience with shared platforms? So like, if you can kind of speak of a bit of like your background with shared platforms, but then as well as like, like what are the key elements that you've seen show up? And who's brave enough to go first? Who wants to go first? Do you want to start with?
I'll do it.
Go for it.
I was on the unmute. Thank you for that intro. I feel like I need to reciprocate, but for the sake of time, I will not, but thank you. So shared platforms, I think, is such like an interesting, and I guess I'll just preface this by saying I'm speaking from a place of both being like a funded young person who is now working for the Ontario Trillium Foundation or Youth Opportunities Fund, and using those experiences to help support the up and coming young people to like navigate their way through funding and philanthropy. So that's kind of like where it comes from for me. And so, as a young person who is navigating kind of trying to patch together some kind of livelihood through basically funding only, it was really difficult to try and find relationships with organizations who could hold, that responsibility well, because it oftentimes did feel rushed, and not always like really authentic. So now with that lens, working with the Youth Opportunities Fund, we've adopted this model, whereas there's an organizational mentor who works with young folks in the grassroots. And I just want to say, feeding back to what you had mentioned, Jillian, that Black and Indigenous groups are chronically underfunded. So the Youth Opportunities Fund primarily focuses on Black-led and Indigenous-led groups. So there's just, we really encourage that folks like take that time to find alignment with the people who will hopefully be mentoring, groups through that work, through that really powerful work.
That's really helpful. No,
yeah.
that was good. Yeah. The was like, ooh, I completed my thought. That was a good thought.
Yeah.
And it's really, and that's why I invited you here today, to tell you the truth, was the perspective that you have from being a young person that did a lot of work within philanthropy from the grassroots, getting different foundational money that I was there with you, and you've done more, but then as well as now being in the position of being the foundation and the funder and trying to bring that in, and kind of knowing, because one thing that I think is important, and what you said is like, how do they hold the responsibility well? And I think a part of holding that responsibility well is having a bit of empathy and compassion and knowing, right? And you have that. But I want to give other folks too. Yes, the funder report. Thank you for sharing that. But Maya, I would love to hear your voice of just a glimpse of some of introduction of some of your experience with shared platforms and the key elements that you've kind of seen.
Thanks, Jermaine. Yeah, thanks, Krista. Yeah, I mean, I love that you drew out like clear intentions, balance, capacity, and relationships, because I think one of the biggest aspects for shared platform relationship building, and I'm sure like for lots of folks who do platforming work or run their own grassroots organizations who are on this call, like this will feel very familiar. But it's so important to establish what transparency and what the trust like building process will look like between the organizational mentor and the trustee or the group themselves. And that can happen in so many different ways, right? I mean, there's great resources that the ONN has created in terms of, as an organization, do you feel ready to be an organizational mentor or a trustee, and being able to kind of check that for oneself internally to sort of examine what infrastructure do we have in place. And, I think, it can happen so many different ways, but having like agreements in place, whether those are a combination of like, again, depending what's appropriate for the culture of the organization and the grassroots group, a mix of written agreements, verbal agreements, shared principles, having some of those, an opportunity to go through the exercise together of articulating what are our values, what are our ways of working together, how are we going to be building trust together, how are we going to navigate stuff when things get hard, or like when things don't go how we think that they're going to go, because inevitably, as we all know, that will happen. So I think almost building like a shared work culture together as a shared platform, as the organizational mentor organization and the grassroots groups themselves, sort of saying, how are we going to work together, and how are we going to address some of the power imbalances that come with that work? And I think some of those ways are really, I think, being transparent as well with each other about what are the accountabilities that each has, right? Like the nonprofit, the charity will have accountabilities to CRA and to these really colonial structures that will feel really bureaucratic and like limiting in a lot of ways, because we're then talking about two different worldviews and two different value systems, if not more, right? Institutional and grassroots. And it's sort of about finding that common language together to say, okay, here are the accountabilities on this side, but also here are the accountabilities on this side. Like for young people running organizations and building organizations and doing work in community, there's a huge accountability to community. And people's social capital is really like connected to that, right? And so, yeah, I think that really needs to be held with a lot of care. So all of that, I didn't actually talk about what my relationship is to shared platforms. So I'll do
No,
that.
but I actually I have a question. No, I have a follow-up question because that's actually just good context. Now I'm curious about, and Jillian, we're gonna get to you, don't worry. Is where have you seen like the best that you've been in that conversation of gaining clarity and understanding of the accountabilities and responsibility and building that culture, that relationship that you're speaking about? Where have you kind of seen, where have you seen that you've seen like, oh, that was pretty good, that experience, that we learned that, like it might not have started that way, but like, where have you kind of been in that experience?
It's a great question. I feel like hopefully I'll be able to, I'm gonna like ramble a tiny bit and then hopefully I'll be able to have a succinct answer. I feel like part of the recipe of doing that is like time and commitment. And so that means that inevitably there will be like messiness and lack of clarity and like mistakes. And if there can be a trust building process where people can circle back and like hold that complexity together and feel in relationship with one another in the process, then I think that that's like the ingredients that need to go into the process. So there's, I guess the thing is that a shared platform relationship, and it kind of says this, like, it's almost like a warning in the ONN guidebook, like, beware, like, this is a messy place. This is a messy process. You know what I mean? Because there's so much complexity. You're navigating so many like regulatory frameworks, you're navigating worldviews, and you're building relationship, and power is not equal or even in that context, right? So I feel like when I've seen it done well, I guess it's more like when I've seen the values be present, right? Of like just openness to learning, openness to changing direction, and also like a practice of actually implementing change. So there's been a number of different groups that I've been involved with over the years. And it's interesting, Jillian, you know, to hear also your experience full circle. Like many of us, I think, have run projects or coordinated projects that have been on shared platforms, and then maybe we've worked with shared platforms in a different way. But I think that there's a lot of, like, I think there's a lot of grassroots groups and grassroots leaders who are really pushing the agenda right now on what is needed in that relationship. I think that's happening in many different places, like across Ontario, across Canada. I've been involved with YSI. I've been involved with a collaborative right now that is a systems change collaborative with YOF, looking at the art system. Jermaine was referencing that at the beginning. And I think, and Young Leaders Circle, and then as well as I run the shared platform at Sketchworking Arts. And right now we've got about 14 initiatives. And again, I know there's folks on the call who have different scales of shared platforms. But I think when there are sort of a set of shared agreements that you can keep touching back to, and again, those take time, right? They take time to build together. And that's a really crucial aspect of the relationship building process. So I don't know if I answered your question fully, Jermaine, but
no, you got it. You got it. You got there. You got there. Because you said, and the thing is, and I realized why you didn't necessarily name particular, you were trying not to name a particular instance, because like you just said, like 14 different shared platforms. Like I guess there's a plethora of experiences that you don't want to make people feel left out. I'm really curious, Jillian, because you were part of actually writing and building the foundations, like the pipelines of building like this social infrastructure piece, right? And social infrastructure, I think that's a big part of shared platform, right? Is like there needs to be a relationship between people in order to get them onto this cause, right? But as well as there needs to be avenues for understanding with the people that are in community, they're in the grassroots, but as well as understanding with the organization. And some of the things that I remember from that article was convenings are important, capacity building is important. These are the different things that in order to like foster that relationship, you need to actually have the convenings, have the conversation. So I'm curious of your experience from that research in 2009 that you're kind of doing of building this foundation, but then to now of like shared platforms, your understanding, your perspective and your experience of shared platforms now, of like because to be honest, like I hear shared platforms, and you alluded to, is like it's just been named so many different things. It's been the same thing for so long. So maybe just speak to your perspective and your experience with shared platforms. And I know you have a lot, but maybe choose something that you feel relevant.
Sure. Well, just listening to you, Maya, I was thinking of like, is it helpful to provide a real life example of like some of that complexity? Could I just like share an example?
Please.
Now I'm involved in a group that's we're called the NDG Art Hive. We're a unincorporated group that joined our local community council, and we provide an open art studio space in several buildings in our community. And just the complexity, for example, the community council and we both have the same funder. And let's say part of our funding hasn't come in, and we have several facilitators that are depending on those funds for their livelihoods. So when that we're waiting for that amount of money to come in, we need to make sure that the council knows that money is going to be coming, right? We need to make sure that we're accountable not only to those facilitators, but then the communities that they're serving in those spaces, because it takes so much work and relationship to provide programming in the communities that we're supporting in our neighborhood. So there's accountability to the community we're serving, to the facilitators, to the funders who are supporting that work, and then to the shared platform as well. And so it gets messy when the funding hasn't come in yet, and it's like, well, can we still pay these facilitators? Or an insurance issue comes up, right? And figuring out that accountability. So I just wanted to provide kind of maybe a specific example so people could wrap their heads around some of those types of complexities. I hope that's helpful. And the name shared platform, I think I was in the room when we decided to start calling it that, but the response was a bit to the most common term, which is trusteeship, which was so transactional. And everything that we've heard about when this relationship doesn't work is when it's treated like a transaction. Mm-hmm. And when both the shared platform and the group treat each other like it's Bell Canada, and you're paying for a service as opposed to working together. And I think that's something that's been consistent throughout.
Yeah. Oh man, it's so complex. I'm trying to do my best of hosting this conversation and share my own perspective, because when I think about the systemic issues that are at play constantly in this relationships that we're put in, right? And you named a lot of the complexity of think about it. For instance, Ontario Trillium Foundation funds a lot of the work that I do, right? Not necessarily directly through 4 different organizations to come in, right? Different streams, but the accountability is to community. Accountability is to this organization that you're, depending on where the funding stream's coming, the organization. Then it's to Youth Opportunities Fund. Then it's to Ontario Trillium Foundation. Then it's to the Ontario government. Because once I go hey, we need more funding for this, they're like, oh, well, we only have a certain cap, right? Or especially one thing that's really buzzing in the not-for-profit right now is we went from a 3.5% in the discretionary quota to give to organizations to 5%. And it's now that we have this more leeway, how are we going to be, who's responsible for what? You know what I mean? Who's responsible for getting the money to the grassroots organizations that are going to be serving the community? What are our practices and our principles of how do we find out the principles? How do we build a relationship that is a good relationship that's not going to be harmful to the community and the grassroots organizations, but as well as that's not going to be too liable for the charities, right? Because what happens, because we only have so much time, I'm just going to bring this in, right? Is we have Black and Indigenous grassroots leaders that are coming in non-incorporated. We're coming into relationship with charitable organizations that automatically, upon agreement, have control over our projects, and legally from the tax from CRA, they have direction and control of our projects. So automatically our relationships a little bit is like, oh, you own us. Literally, they own the work that we're doing, right? And right now, with Senator Ratna, is doing this bill S-216 about how can we change up this language from direction and control to no, how are we going to the charitable activities? How are we actually accountable to the mission and the outcomes that we're trying to do and the impact, for instance? And really it's more expenditure responsibility. So instead of there be this language of resource responsibility and having language of these grassroots organizations being the resource, right? Because now in the language is in a shared platform relationship, technically the charity is the one that owns these things, right? And then we can have like certain agreements, MOUs that we try to have with people, but at the same time, there's something that's in our relationship to build some trust. We need to kind of know, okay, whose role is what, who's responsible, but also how are we both accountable for the community work? And I think that's probably, I guess like my question to y'all now is really thinking about how do we build these shared values? How do we kind of build the practices or the relationships where we know how we get funding to grassroots leaders, grassroots organizations to do the work without so many barriers, and using shared platforms, but also there might be other ways, but like, how can we, what are the shared values that we need to cultivate and practices in order for us to get more of, doing the work, and just using shared platforms to do the work. So I wonder if y'all have like some words around that. Krista.
Yeah, I have some insights. So getting to work with the grassroots groups, I've seen kind of like the good, bad, and the ugly of how these relationships can work with organizational mentors. And I think that one thing, like entering in that relationship can be the work, because there are ways for organizational mentors to like decolonize their practices, for example, and as long as they're finding themselves in a lot of cases comfortable with kind of like putting aside ego or letting go of that like institutional power to learn something new and feel a little vulnerable, I think I don't think I know that in those cases it's been like values become aligned without working too hard towards it. So yeah, that's one way.
Thank you. No, that's really amazing. I always talk about it's creating that braver space, right? For us to be bold, real, accountable, vulnerable, expressive in our relations, right? It takes a level of honesty and sincerity and listening, curiosity. Maya, I saw you post in the chat, you like to use a certain term, co-conspirator. Do you want to speak more about that, or
I mean, sure. I think it's because of the like messiness of the work and the areas for power imbalance to show up. Like, I think part of that building the shared values and the way of working together is to be like, all right, how are we going to creatively problem solve together? And because there's so many like pain points and so many places at which charitable organizations and grassroots groups might be kind of pitted against each other. To be like, if we're going to approach this as co-conspirators. We're going to approach this as creative problem solvers together. And that doesn't mean that the power dynamic is gone. It's still very much there. It needs to be addressed on a regular basis. But I think there's an opportunity in the framing to be like, all right, ultimately, why do shared platforms exist? Why do organizations run shared platforms? It's because there is a barrier for grassroots groups and young people to be able to access funding directly. And so if the model exists in order to build capacity of organizations and to really enable that to happen, like, let that be our shared framing and our shared approach. And that means some creative problem solving, and that means decolonizing some of your practices and pushing back on your board potentially, or pushing back with a funder. You can have those conversations and sort of build out the complexity together.
Yeah, it's really trying to build that container for it. I've been in experiences with organizational mentors where they didn't even have the capacity to really have certain conversations, or the processes where, our capacity building funds, they used it without our permission, but they had to turn around in their staff. They were precarious in their own self. So there's something about how are we being ready to even support these young grassroots people and ourselves, because you may be empowered, but literally you're not actually empowered because the system probably has you kind of messed up too, right? So we all need to find a way to like build our capacity. Jillian, I saw you kind of react a little bit. I'm not sure if you were going to say something.
I was just, yeah, we have to have compassion with each other because I think we are all juggling so much. And the more time we can spend up front with that relationship and make sure it is a values fit, like it might just not be a fit too. And figuring that out earlier on. And it's not necessarily just about values, but just the work that you do and how you work. And so like having those early conversations, and I'm hoping that the toolkit will give you more of those prompts. It doesn't give you the answer, but it can give you some of those things to ask your group and to ask each other, and make sure you know what you're getting into early on before you start that.
Yeah, definitely. And there's something of value to have those conversations like facilitated and hosted and intentional, you know, and actually written down, and have like, you know, that shared understanding, but also it written down. So when things do, you know, things happen, we can come back to, or we can revisit, you know. And yeah, and it's like, because we can have the best intentions starting out front on both ends, right? But then life and circumstances and maybe the actual work, they have impacts that are not what we're serving. And we have to be able to, and that's why I really loved, and maybe this is actually a really good segue. By the way, any questions that y'all have for our panelists, please put them in the chat. But I love that in the toolkit that you also have about an ending of relationship with shared platforms. And I think that's also really important to have that conversation of us knowing, is this serving what we're looking to serve, right? And is this working out for the people, for all the parties in a way? And I guess like, to me, I appreciate that because again, it's about the relationships.
And it's also important for that direction and control piece, because if there is this direction and control, like what are you agreeing in principle you're going to do if that relationship ends? Are you going to continue to direct and control that? Or do you have intentions to, and put that in writing of how you're going to deal with the assets of the group? So that it's really clear and you're protecting yourself as best you can early on.
Yes. Maya, do you want to speak to some of the concrete possibilities that you're sharing here of some of the practices that folks might be able to enter into in shared platforms?
Sure, yeah, I can speak to quickly. Just, I mean, there's such a different scales with the kind of work involved in building a shared platform. So these are like really, really specific. So, but some possibilities just in terms of supporting the relational development piece, I think is building like group support budget lines together, knowing that conflicts will inevitably happen and that conflict resolution can center relationship versus following a very specific, say like HR structure. And so that's one of the ways internally that an organization can really look at its own structure and how it's sort of operating in a colonial framework versus other forms of knowledges and processing. In agreements, you can also identify just who is responsible for what, but also who, like if there's particular areas that neither group or neither party is responsible for, it can be really helpful to surface that pretty early because it can visibilize some expectations that maybe folks didn't even know that they had and didn't give voice to. But if it's clear that that the charity or that the grassroots group is not responsible for a particular thing, it can identify either a gap of being like, who's going to do that then? Or it can sort of name some of the expectations that could affect the relationship early on. I think definitely addressing intellectual property in agreements is really important, as Jermaine was naming. And just in general, when I'm working with the initiatives on our shared platform, and again, I'm sure other folks do this too, but if they are approaching a funder who doesn't understand the shared platform model, I always offer just to say, you know, what can I do? Like, can I write a letter? Can I jump on a call with them? How can I support you to be able to build a relationship with this funder? And similarly, if we're working with a shared platform initiative that wants to work with a different organization as a mentor, so like we're happy to like help share our infrastructure and to talk through if an organization is interested in building that up, to share what we can to support that process. So those are just some possibilities.
I think that's beautiful of like, I'll just surface the metaphor of shared platform. right? Is like, it's a platform to be able to facilitate and be able to like have access to whatever resources or relationships you need in order to do the activities of the grassroots work or community work you're doing, right? So shared platform is really, and ideally, really not-for-profits, and hey, thanks ONN, you can kind of help to do this, is to create the social infrastructure of sorts, so that an organization, maybe you can't get funding from this round, this time for Youth Opportunities Fund, but hey, Laidlaw has something, and maybe Sketch is able to facilitate that conversation, you know, for these grassroots organizations or leaders. So thank you for bringing that, and thank you all for what you're sharing. And we have about 10 minutes left in the webinar. If there's any questions that people have, please, questions, but also final words that folks have. Shout out, hey, what's up, Ali? Yeah.
I just want to reflect on something
Yes.
Carol had mentioned, sorry, that, you know, specifically in the North, capacity building for OMs might be necessary. And I see this a lot in the work that I do, because, you know, shared values are so important, and like localized contexts are as well. But it seems like groups who apply for funding in the North are often outsourcing their OM to somewhere like in Southern Ontario, which I mean, can and does work. There's people doing really great work, but it would be nice to have that like really specific kind of context about what's going on in community.
I wonder if I'm allowed to do this. I know this is being recorded, but hey, y'all, you're gonna have to be okay with me. This is a conversation is literally having with directors at Youth Opportunities Fund, is how do we actually support organizational mentors? So we know what are the organizational mentors that are there, that are out there that can fit for different grassroots organizations. And I think that there's some work that could be done, is really identifying and building up the readiness of different shared platforms, and then as well as the readiness for platformees and whatnot. So there's just something, especially for the North, particularly for, I'm talking about, you know, like Sudbury up, right? Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, North Bay, Timmins, Thunder Bay. Sorry if I'm missing anyone. So I'm sure I'm missing a lot of people. Hey, big shout outs to Sudbury. I'll see y'all in a couple of weeks. So any final words that folks have before, like, on our panelists, like final words that you want to offer the not-for-profit sector of Ontario around shared platforms? I know it sounds really epic, but don't worry. Don't take it too serious.
I think there's some great points in the chat that people are just mentioning. So if I can either just like, I was just gonna say, let's look at the chat, because I think that there's a lot of like really great stuff happening there. But Jillian, you look like you might have something to.
Well, I was going to comment on, someone talked about married and divorced, and like the number of times shared platforms have been talked about as a marriage is incredible. But yeah, make sure you know what you're getting into early on, and even and be clear about that early on, so that you can build that relationship and you know what you're getting into. Also, I just want to say lots of love and attention to payables. And I know that might sound silly, but I feel like it's a major pain point, is how people get paid and what, like, the frequency and the time.
Yeah,
and it's such a stress
huge
point. So like making sure the people who are processing payment understand what that means and what that means to the communities that you're serving.
No, we need to underscore that. Actually, I think a lot of times we need to appreciate our financial departments. We need to appreciate the people that are in finance, and like they have so much overwhelmment of like what they have to do in their work, and they need to be more involved, because finances are directly, especially in the grassroots, these are people's our livelihoods, right? And that could actually harm the relationship that ends up happening, because there's been often times where I've done work and I don't get paid for like 3 months after, or different things where I can't pay my rent, and those things happen. And then like I hate the organization, right? But that's just like how the feeling is. Of course, I'm in a lot of good relationships even still, but you're talking about supporting community. You're talking about the impact that you're trying to make, and you're directly a Black young person. You're directly affecting my livelihood. And I could actually, and I'm not going to, don't worry, y'all, but I can name a lot of organizations within the sector that has happened, right? And that's just like, we need to get out of that practice. So what do we need to do to get the financial teams and get those things in place so it's a little faster? And thank God we're not doing as many checks anymore. God damn it. Oh, I don't even know, because like now we do more electronic stuff, but the checks that was tough. Another thing that I saw in the chat, sorry, was definitely building up also the capacity and support of the staff and even HR and whatnot, right? Is like really the non-for-profits, the shared platforms need to be built up in themselves to be able to operate, to offer any type of thing for community. That 5%, 10% admin fee is not going to be covering your whole HR, right? Like you're gonna have to find other sources to build up your organization, so that you can be ready for the platform. There was something else that I saw that I wanted to speak to. Oh, and yes, also Stacy had a great comment. I don't know if there's there, but it would be great if there was a list of shared platforms in Ontario. That would be amazing. And cool. I want to say thank y'all so much for the chat. Sometimes the chat gets me overwhelmed because I'm like, oh, there's so much happening, and I'm trying to host people on the panel and read. So I'm just going to trust that y'all will take care of the chat. A big thank you, Achima Gwetch, to Krista, to Maya, to Jillian. Thank you for sharing your experience, your expertise, your insights, your wisdoms. Thank you, everyone that has participated, that's joining, whether you gave our energy, your attention, whether you gave us your words, your comments, your questions. Thank you. Hopefully, and we trust that this was helpful and this was useful, and really be in connection. Try to connect with Jillian, try to connect with Maya, with Krista, with myself, with our organizations as well. And let's continue to keep the momentum of this work going. We are in this together. So I invite you to stay tuned. There will be a recording emailed out. There will be resources and links. A big ups, the Shared Platform Toolkit just came out, is launching, and sign up for the ONN newsletter. You know, stay tuned on social media. You can follow me at jermainehenry.ca on everything. And yeah, take care of yourselves. Good afternoon. Any final words from our panelists? If you just want to say bye, love, you know, I gave us 3 minutes just to do our thing. Man, this chat is going off. Oh, thanks, y'all. Appreciate you.
Go ahead, Krista.
Oh no, I was just gonna say this is one of the chattiest chats I've ever seen.
This is good.
Congrats to you all.
Thank y'all. This has been really great. Let's keep on doing this. Oh, and then hey, Kavita! Sorry.
Thank you for hosting, Jermaine. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar today, and we hope to stay in touch. The toolkit is a hopeful launch today. We did advertise that Jillian was providing a sneak peek. You will get a link to the toolkit and some other resources in the follow-up email that all registrants will receive. So yeah, stay tuned to our social and email for the launch. But of course, if you're here and you had registered for the webinar, you will get the link and any additional resources that the panelists share on shared platforms. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank y'all.
Thank you.